So the room is filling very well. Thanks everybody for the interest. Great to have everybody here to this very first panel discussion. And I think now we are ready to officially start this event with the very great colleague of mine, Larry Olomorfe, but he will introduce himself and give you also an introduction to this event today. So Larry, turn is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you, Gilda, for such wonderful words. I'd like to welcome and thank everyone for attending this event today. As you may well know, it's the first of a sequence of events, and details of the next conversation online chat that we planning early next year will be provided at the end of today's session. Just to give a brief background as to what we're hoping for and who we are. Well, first of all, myself, I'm Larry Olomorfe, and I'm a co-founder of Responsible Leadership Academy, and it's a collective of ex-professionals who worked in international organizations, grassroots organizations, civil society, a collection or think tank where we identify some of the pertinent questions for today in terms of what responsible leadership looks like and should look like. And that's the purpose, basically the context of what we're doing and why we're here today. And this conversation today, as I said earlier, is one that will kick off the sequence of chats and hopefully deriving or generating a number of recommendations and policies as guidance papers and guidance or roadmaps for the way we move forward in this new change reality. The way we hope to proceed today is to identify a number of topics that we think are pertinent, such as, well, what do structures of international organizations allow for required innovation and transformation, or for leadership? If IGOs act upon their own survival as highest priorities, is there still a mandate for their future or validity for the future? Does responsible and meaningful leadership match the culture and frameworks of existing international organizations? From current experience, I would actually say no, that's my opinion. Are IGOs attracting and recruiting the best leaders? That's a debatable point. And what does the IGO of the future look like? And by IGO, we're not also just thinking about intergovernmental organizations, but international organizations and other said entities who have mandates that operate in the sectors that I feel we all, or most of us, operate in. So we have a panel which have been identified, and I'll pass it over now to Gilda to introduce the panelists and then into the first session. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry, for that. So just to remind everybody, this is a panel with a quite ambitious title, Reinventing Leadership in International Organizations, Leadership of the Future. Quite an ambitious title. And actually, I think for this very first panel in which we explore the challenges, the future visions, we have managed, and we are very honored to have really brilliant and experienced speakers, panelists today, because what they have in common is loads of experience with international organizations, with the challenges that is faced. And actually what they also have in common is a vision, how we could approach it in the future. So actually, a little bit of introduction, and whatever I say, it's much too short to give all the experience a lot of space, but we only have a 3 minutes intro. So let me say the most important things, I guess, about the panelists that we have here today. There is Valerio Nicolari. He is a former special representative of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, super experienced in structure. He has a demonstrated history of working in public relations and the communications industry, skilled with international relations, non-governmental organizations, civil society, policy analysis. I guess that's a core point where he's absolutely brilliant with. And he's a master degree focused in diplomacy from the Academy of Diplomatic Studies in Malta. And we have a quotation from each panelist. In his case, the quotation is, IGOs need to become better at looking at their failures, because ignoring their failures means that they are losing some very good knowledge and are prone to keep repeating the same mistakes. That's actually his quotation. We have Ambika Samartia. She's Director of Communications at the Solutions Journalism Network. Ambika has been creating, teaching, and writing at the intersection of storytelling and social good for 2 decades. She believes in working with local teams, developing work collaboratively, taking risks, very sympathetic for me personally, in telling authentic, powerful stories. She has produced content for current TV channels, UNICEF, Prekel.org, UNFPA, and Save the Children, and is trained for BBC Media Action, Columbia University, and the New York Film Academy. She did much more. Her quotation, her intro for the following day is, without seeing yourself and your stories reflected in your workplace, you do not find the freedom to pursue your true identity and calling. This will be great, the input, definitely. We have Ernest J. Harold, former Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment of NATO, currently Executive Director at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, bringing a lot of experience in here. And his quotation, intro quotation for the day actually is, to lead any organization, we need an understanding of how to follow it. It is through memory of our followership that our actions as leaders are most effective. And last but not least, Katarzyna Gatarpakadze, actually co-founder of the Responsible Leadership Academy, one of the persons who is responsible for having this series of panel discussions, for having the Responsible Leadership Academy. She served in senior leadership roles at the OSCE, Save the Children, and other international organizations. She's educated in psychology, graduate of Stanford University Leadership Development Academy, and she lives by the motto, organizations don't create results, only people do. So now I'm really honored and looking forward to this honest, reflective panel discussion with the goal of actually not so much looking back, but definitely learning from the past. And the main focus is, how do we approach leadership in the future? And I think this really brilliant panel will give a wonderful kickoff to examine this topic. And by the way, my name is Gilda Nancy Horvath, journalist since 15 years in international organizations and different public national, and really honored to have this talk here today. And actually, I'm also have the honor to go into the panel with the first question. I hope everybody is ready. And the first question, no wonder, is about change, and it goes out to all our panelists. First question is actually, if you could change one thing immediately, like by magic, in international organizations now, what would it be? And I would say maybe Ernest would like to start first to share his views on that question. Thanks, everybody.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the kind introduction. First, let me say thank you to all of the folks that have built the Responsible Leadership Academy, including Katarzyna and her team. The notion of building an organization that looks at how to promote and encourage responsible leadership in international organizations is perhaps long overdue. And so it's really a pleasure to be part of this discussion today as you all kick off a study and a conversation about how to improve the service and performance of international organizations that serve our communities around the globe. Thank you to Gilda and Larry for being our cat herders this morning, trying to keep all of us on topic and to keep us properly focused on the work of today's panel. I'll do my best to be on topic and as short and succinct as I can be. To the first question that Gilda has asked us about what would I change in international organization structure or leadership, I go back to the notion of groupthink. The idea that acceptive ways of working end up, rather than promoting growth, they constrain the growth of an organization with a failure to consider new ideas. So if I could change anything in international organizations, I would look for ways to infuse new ideas into the organization, the management, and the development and delivery of policy recommendations from those organizations. Very often that organizations become established. They have ways of working, they have procedures they follow, which in the early days gave order and structure and purpose to the work of the organization. But over time, those same procedures, those same processes become almost like plaque building up in your arteries. They become a constriction of good ideas, and they block the flow of initiative, innovation, and simple good governance. So I would look for ways to infuse new ideas, and we'll talk about that in the future part of this discussion. But to me, it looks like new, frequent refreshing of leadership, frequent rotation of people, either into the organization or moving around within the organization, so that they get exposed to different people and different ideas, but also bring their experiences into different parts of the organization in order to promote innovative thinking and behavior. And I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot. I guess that was a very, very strong intro to this discussion already. Ambika, you would be the second in this round to have an input on that question. What would you change if you could just change something immediately in international organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that leadership generally needs to be focused on how to transition out and who to transition in. I think oftentimes people don't think about both sides of that coin, but it's really about whose voices and and really trying to get the funnel and actually make sure that we have feedback loops so that people are coming in. I feel like a lot of international organizations are alienating youth and alienating people who have a lot of voice, who could be valuable, but they're not, because they may not look like leadership, they may not be like the same age as leadership, or have the same credentials. So I think we're losing out on different skill sets. I think we're losing out on different experiences because we're sort of like cookie cuttering what type of people come in and out of these things. And I often find that when there is people in leadership, they're not always thinking about how they're going to transition out, who they're going to bring in within the organization itself. So I think that there's a lot more professional development that can go on with people at junior and mid levels in organizations. And I think that people need to be really thinking outside the box about like what type of people should be involved in leadership. Because I think leadership can be very different in a lot of ways. And I often find that the best leaders are those who had really untraditional pathways and like really kind of like went to different sides of different things and came from different places. I think that those are the people who you end up, have a lot more people skills or and are able to think outside the box. And I sort of want to channel a lot more of those people in.
Well, actually, this is the perfect bridge to Valerio Nicolai when you say people who are innovative, doing things in a way that was not done before. But Valerio also has a lot of experience in the political context with that. Valerio, what would it be that you would change immediately if you could do it today?
I think I will change the way we are. I mean, I believe we are far too polite. to me, the existing senior leadership of intergovernmental organization is not the result of meritocracy, not the result of competence. It is rather the result of promoting all kinds of political failures as leaders and accepting political blackmail and nepotism as a type of human resources strategy. So what I will change the rules on nepotism, which probably will lead to 30% of people at the highest level in INGOs to practically to be forced to quit. I will have very strong rules to avoid all kind of political failures, to be retired in leadership position at the level, very high level at international NGOs. And I would like to see public KPIs for this senior leadership. I mean, the INGOs, which are supposed to promote transparency and meritocracy and so on, they're not transparent nor meritocratic. Quite the opposite most of the time. So these very simple rules, which are practically required by any serious corporation, are light years away from the rules of international NGOs and intergovernmental organizations.
Valerio, I guess you already gave some very good points that our audience will react to. Just one point, dear audience, you are today included approximately at 5 p.m. After our first 2 rounds. We will have your comments. Also, for sure, you can already react on that. Is the rules of international organizations too polite, forcing us to be too polite? Is there a problem with nepotism? Put it in comments. But even at this point, more interested I'm into the statement of Katarzyna, who has a lot of experience in international organizations. What would you change, actually, if you could change something immediately today, Katarzyna?
Thanks a lot, Gilda. And I already have questions to all 3 of my co-panelists based on what you said. But before I go into that, actually let me tell you a quick story. So once in my life, I was working in a post-war country, and there was an intergovernmental organization working there as well. And the representatives of this organization came and visited hospitals and decided that the medical labs in these hospitals are in a really awful condition. So they wrote a beautiful project, and they purchased state-of-the-art scanning microscopes for these hospitals. And then they published this as a big success story in their annual reports. And then a couple of years later, a person who was in charge of that in a different capacity visited the same place and went just out of curiosity to these hospitals and met the director of the biggest of them and didn't see the scanning microscopes. And so he asked, okay, where are these microscopes? And the director took him to an attic where all the microscopes for all the hospitals were beautifully packed in a box, in their boxes, and were sitting there. And he was like, why aren't you using them? What has happened? And the guy said, you know, we have very unstable source of electricity. We have no technical support to actually fix those things if they break. And our personnel is not trained to use them, so they would break easily. So just to protect them, we decided to keep them in boxes. And I'm saying this because I think if I could change one thing in intergovernmental organizations today, it would be how they define success. Because I think if you define success, taking it out of the context, and also if everything has to be a success, then you are missing on a critically important point, which is acknowledging, embracing the failures and treating them as something you can learn from. And I have to say, in my years of working in and with intergovernmental organizations, I do not recall a single instance where a project team or a management team would sit down and say, okay, so where did we fail and what can we do about this in the future? Not a single instance. And I think this is one of the limitations of growth, one of the limitations of innovation, one of the limitations of staff development, because if everything has to be perfect, then inevitably you are engaging in teaching your employees to self-censor themselves rather than to iterate and grow. And I have these questions for the co-panelists. Can I ask them now?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I have a question actually to Ambika first. It is my heartfelt belief that leadership is not about the position you occupied on the ladder, but it is about the skills and qualities you bring with you. And I think in intergovernmental organizations, you have people with amazing leadership qualities, but they happen to be constrained by being too low in the hierarchy of things, so they actually never get to use their leadership abilities. Do you think they should? Do you think this should be leadership by quality and not leadership by position?
In my experience, I have found a lot of organizations can be very agile about how they give people leadership qualities. One of the things I find that organizations are not as good at is about working across silos. So if you're someone who's like a designer, or you're a project manager, or you're someone who's like, you know, the account person, very rarely do you get to work in the other spaces. And I find the most successful leaders I've worked with have had design experience, have had presentation experience, have also had project management experience. I think everybody should know how to do a budget. I think everybody should learn how to do a presentation. I think that we should be working to share collaboratively across skill sets. And I think that's one of the probably the most innovative organizations. Like when I worked at Precal, even though we were a design agency, everybody was also a project manager. Everybody also had design skills. People also did a lot of budget work. And I think that there's a real beauty in everyone sort of doing all these different things. Currently, like I work for the Solutions Journalism Network, and some people are journalists, some people aren't, some people are also have a lot of side projects, and it's that integration of having different things that you do and being able to move through from like an HR person to like a project manager to starting a thing. I think that gives people the idea of ownership, and it gives people the idea of initiative. So if you can actually say to someone, hey, I'm a project manager, but I would actually like to be involved in your budget discussions. Can I see your budget and be involved? And that person's like, not only like, sure, I'll share you the budget, but eager to share the budget. I think that's the kind of type of like collaborations that we really, really need to see more of, and the stuff that we need to really foster. So for me, leadership is like less about where you are on the scale and more about the skills that you can build. And I don't think we're always that great at building each other's skills up. And I often think we don't understand where our work intersects. And then what happens is if like the budget people have always done your budget and the project managers have always only been, you know, you're never going to get new ways of thinking, because the type of people who've always done it are the type of people always doing it. And then you're never going to see anything from like a different point of view. You take a designer into a room, into a budget meeting, all of a sudden they're like, hey, why don't we show the data in a different way? And that's the kind of like sparks that you really need to see fly. And I think that's what the goal of leadership is to foster that type of collaboration. So I think you can foster that type of collaboration at any level, but you have to be interdisciplinary.
Katarzyna, you had two more questions also to Valerio and Mr. Harold, I guess.
Indeed, and to EJ, I wanted to say what you said is something that in Polish language we say an overgrowth of form over substance, and that made me smile almost, but smile in a sad way. I think, and I was curious what your thinking is. I think that a lot of this groupthink is because we are. Not we, but there is a systemic fear of getting out of the comfort zone, and the rules are giving people the comfort zone. Do you think that's indeed the case? And if so, then what can we do about it?
Please, microphone.
Yep. So thank you for the question. And I accept the criticism. The point that I was trying to make is that when we are inside of an organization that has structure, rules, forms, and processes, they do give us definitional structure to our roles. But to Ambika's point, we can very easily miss the hidden talents of the people that are within our organizations and not get the most out of people that are there to do a job and there to see the organization succeed. There's a famous quote attributed to Ronald Reagan, I hope it's truly his, that anything is possible as long as you don't care who gets the credit. So in organizations, when you are looking to succeed, looking to promote a policy, looking to develop the next process or the next thing, the next policy pronouncement, if you can find those people that have the sparks that Ambika mentioned, if you can give them the opportunity to try their ideas in an environment that encourages trial and error rather than a zero defects environment, then you're going to get more out of it. But that's very hard, as you point out, in the international organization environment, because we come from such diverse backgrounds and experiences. You know, this is where diversity in the international organizations is actually a strength and a key accomplishment, even if it's not perfect. So we have a lot of things that we can be more diverse in terms of inclusion, in terms of promotion, in terms of equal opportunities. But the international organizations, by definition, bring people with diverse backgrounds, diverse views, diverse experiences. And if we don't create the environment that, first of all, recognizes that, you know, I, as an American male, come with a certain experience level and a certain background and things that I have done, and a European female from Eastern Europe is going to have a completely different set of experiences, background, and education. I need to be open to the possibility that she has something to teach me. And if I can be humble enough to do that, then the organization benefits because of that. And one of the things that I noted, you know, as part of this conversation, I have a sort of a radical idea here, and I know this may be, you know, more of form over substance. But if the idea is that leaders come into an international organization and into their position with the end in mind, that we should all take our position within that organization, hoping to put ourselves out of a job, rather than suffering the delusion that we are too important to be replaced and that the organization will not survive without us. So if we can be humble enough to do that, we can and promote that notion for others who come into our organizations, I think we'll see more success in bringing in ideas, achieving that rotation of people through an organization, and encouraging innovation and new thinking. Thanks.
Thank you, EJ. At this point, I would like to remind Katarzyna still had a question to Valerio, and I think it's really time to get a comment of Valerio about everything said, because I think there's also, we were talking about, yeah, we are the structures and respect of diverse backgrounds, and we need to be innovative. But in fact, if you try to innovative, there is also resistance inside structures. Not everybody is embracing innovation. And Katarzyna, maybe shortly you put your question to Valerio, and Valerio has his comment on everything said until now. I think he has a lot to say. And then I see Larry is raising his hand after that. Larry, if that's fine, Larry, good with you? Okay.
Perfect.
Then I will ask my question. One of the things that we have, we kind of come around in the Responsible Leadership Academy, one of the issues is the notion of merit-based recruitment and how it is understood. And in the context of international organizations, I was always joking that it's so exclusive because you have to have, you know, 2 graduate degrees and 20 years of experience and still be below 30 years of age to and be from a certain background to enter a certain position of decision making in an international organization. But what we have been discussing is not really only merit-based recruitment, which is in fact very rigid often because the job description, the job formulation is very static and very rigid and very siloed, as Ambika said, but values-based recruitment. So recruiting people because they share and they contribute to the very values, the very principles that an international organization stands for. And I was wondering what you think about that.
I'm sorry, I will be rude. To me, this is a joke. And all this is a joke too. I mean, humble leadership at the level of INGOs. Seriously, can you give me one single example of a guy who quitted saying, hey, look, there are better people than me in this organization. And he quitted not because of corruption scandals, not because of scandals. Purely, he did that. Second, do we dare to do a research on international intergovernmental organization at the level of senior leadership and see who's who? Because most of the people are sons, daughters of ex-presidents, ex-ambassadors. Only look at the European Commission. Third, do we dare to look at the way people are promoted? I will tell you a few examples. The director from European Commission gave a huge contract to the World Bank. So the best paid bureaucracy in the world gave a contract to the second best paid bureaucracy in the world. And the World Bank contracted another people who contracted another people who contracted another people who did their work at the grassroots. So we paid all that money to all kinds of bureaucracies. This woman was, of course, promoted immediately at the World Bank, where he implemented the project which was done. If you look at the transfer between European commissioners and World Bank and the way back is insane. And this is the fact all over the place. I know in Romania, for instance, you have Secretary of States who approve World Bank grants, and then they move to lead those grants. World Bank doesn't say anything about this obvious conflict of interest. So conflict of interest doesn't apply to any of those leaders. And it's seriously, it sounds like and this stuff with groupthink. Yeah, I mean, it sounds great, but do you know any red team in any of those organizations? Yes, I heard this from everybody. Groupthink is bad. But did any of them do anything about it besides, having these really nice, cute words? And I'm so fed up with listening to, all this. Hey, look, it's going to work. People, in fact, are nice and so on. No, we need to acknowledge that there's lots of failures and awful failures. We spend and we continue spending huge amounts of money. The fact that we have such poor leadership made the European project, which is practically the best thing that happened to Europe, to be in peril. The Council of Europe, which is supposed to be the protector of human rights in Europe, it's a joke. I mean, it's blackmailed by Russia, by Turkey, for Azerbaijan, because if those guys don't pay, the organization doesn't exist. And also this with culture, we are culturally sensitive. No, we're not culturally sensitive. We don't care about it. We just say we care about it because, again, if you look at the research, you know, I'm sorry to say it, but white male educated in English languages and coming from a certain university in France dominate practically everything. So the talk is good, but walking the talk, nobody does it. And as you said, how can you do this? I mean, of course, if I am the son of the senator, of course, I will go to the best university because my father has the money to send me there. And not everybody, I mean, I saw lots of people with really great, coming from really great universities. They don't impress me much. I saw lots of morons coming with great university degrees. And another thing which I wanted to say, grassroots experience doesn't mean traveling experience. Grassroots experience is not the fact that you visited a place or you read the pictures from a really nice report there. And despite the fact that all this organization keeps saying, hey, look, grassroots experience, I never met any leaders there with any type of grassroots experience which to be considered even acceptable. All of their experience were being the sons, daughter, and so on of somebody great. That's not fair. And we don't talk about it because our careers depend on being nice, of paying lip service. All the stimulants, all of them are towards accepting groupthink and not combating it. And if you show me one organization where the incentives are for combating groupthink, and I'm talking about intergovernmental organization, I will be very curious to know it. And to give you the example, NATO, the vice president of NATO, is a guy from Romania who is, you know, it's incredible that he got into that position. It's insane. And that can be the case everywhere. I mean, if we take, you know, name by name by name by name, the results will be catastrophic.
Thank you, Valerio, giving us the chili and the proof that this discussion is actually uncensored. So in only 2 more minutes or maybe 3 minutes, we take all your questions. But beforehand, Larry, Katarzyna, and then EJ will have their comments on what was said before now, and then actually we start taking the comments. Thanks to everybody watching. We see your comments and we will also start reading out them soon. But now first we have Larry, Katarzyna, then EJ, and then we go to the audience questions.
Yeah, thank you for that, Gilda. In a way, Valerio touched on what I wanted to say in reaction to the notion that change is, or talent is spread across a particular space and time within an organization, and that we just need to, you know, unlock this potential by restructuring. But we all know, having worked in IGOs, the permanence of certain structures, right? And so the processes and the culture internally prevents that unlocking, right? It's not just in terms of management who are in the leadership position, but those who are following, who have internalized that process. And when you do reach out to them, if you come with an innovative style of leadership or management, you hear, well, it's not the way we do things in this organization, or it's not in my job description, right? And that's from people who you're trying to encourage to participate. But then to EJ's point, and this is where I think Valerio nailed it, right? Even if you want to unlock that potential, what is the template or the exemplar they use to judge us by? It's a Eurocentric white male, predominantly so, right? Even if you look at gender mainstreaming programs or D&I programs, you see who's setting the agenda. So even if we come with an innovative plan of action to try and unleash the potential within an organization such as these IGOs, you need to convince people who are the gatekeepers, who are looking for other people in their mold. And they feel that threat at an existential level that they thwart the development. And that's because it's just not the way it is done. So when we talk about leadership, we also talk about having the courage to do exactly what Valerio asked, in the sense to sacrifice your position and create that space for others. Now, whether you do that through fixed term tenure, I'm not sure, because you do have that, but there are other mechanisms in which they can continue to keep their hegemony, right? So, and this is from experience of having worked in the sector for over 25 years, across the sector of IGOs, international organizations, within government and everything, you see the same people. You only see a few others. Valerio was one of them until, you know, he started challenging the status quo, you know, and I struggle to articulate others outside of myself who work within the OCE at a particular level. And these are the frustrations that people articulate when they look outside, or they look from the outside in and say, well, how representative is this organization? Why would I apply to these jobs? Because there's no incentive or no instruction or indicator to show that it is actually an agile, inclusive, you know, a workspace and area. So this is, I think, a way of reacting to EJ's point, not to put EJ in the spot, but to say, we need people in his position who share those views, who is open and receptive to learning from others, to kind of push that agenda internally too, actually. And we do know that this is something that he aspires to as well and acquiesces to. But, you know, one person or 10 people, or even 1,000 across the global spectrum isn't necessarily going to address that particular problem, because it's so fundamentally embedded in these structures that it would take a seismic change, really, or recognition for things to move forward. And I'm hoping that with RLA, this is something that we will generate in terms of creating those platforms for that critical discussion and for that critical change. Thank you.
Ambika was also raising the hand, but still, Katarzyna, EJ, Ambika, please, everybody, stick to a reasonable time, because we really need to start taking in the audience, which is really wild discussing here. So Katarzyna, EJ, Ambika, and then we go to the audience.
I wanted to say a couple of things. I agree that the courage to create space for others is something that is desperately needed from the leaders of today, and I also agree that it's a structural change that's needed. But I will also say that there is a certain momentum on two fronts. One, COVID has really shown that a lot of things that were kind of unthinkable before all of a sudden became not only possible, but they became a daily reality in intergovernmental organizations, which means and has shown to many people that at certain level change is possible. And I would also be careful. Yes, there is a very real pressure from participating or member states on the leadership and organizational practices of these organizations. But there should be enough wisdom to distinguish when no change is a result of this pressure of inability of states to come to a common ground, and when it is just because of certain organizational inertia that could be overcome. And I wanted to also talk a little bit about accountability, and because that's one thing that there's no such thing as legal accountability on behalf of intergovernmental organizations for how they spend money or how they do things. And that could be something that, I mean, if I wanted to be radical, I would say we need citizens oversight panels for intergovernmental organizations to see how they spend their money. Really independent, really driven by people, really inclusive and really diverse. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, EJ, then Ambika.
So thank you for all of the discussion. This is really fascinating. I tend to be an optimist, and I tend to see the glass as half full versus half empty. And so a lot of what I've described are aspirational goals, And one of the reasons I took that approach was because this work that the Responsible Leadership Academy is undertaking has to be motivated by a vision to get to something and to get to improvements in the international organizations you're talking about. Now, vision without action is dreaming. So vision with action can lead to change. I take Valeriu's points about the status quo, about the existing problems in international organizations generally. My personal experience is with the United Nations and with NATO in various different activities. And I saw from my personal point of view that limited change or limited impact was possible within my own area of responsibility. Now, that's one person doing something within an organization, but I stay in touch with the people that I've worked with in these organizations over time. And I know that there's been a lasting impact to some of the things that I have done, instituted, directed, led, or encouraged. So I take personal pride and pleasure that that is the case, that there is a life after me for some of the ideas I've introduced. Is that enough? Absolutely not. Is it going to change the world? Probably not by itself. So I would hope that the work of RLA is going to be to create multiple instantiations of people like me who are going out there idealistically to try to change the world. One step at a time, one place at a time, one division within an organization at a time. But if we don't start somewhere, it will never change. And we'll constantly be having these discussions about how screwed up international organizations remain, rather than looking for the things that we can do to implement change. To Katarzyna's point about accountability and citizens' demands, well, yes, but we already have that process through the chartering of international organizations by national governments. And it's on each of us as citizens of our nation to push our governments to demand accountability for the monies and the resources that our nations put at the disposal of these international organizations. If they don't demand accountability at the political level, how are we as citizens going to achieve that individually? And if we try to do it as a mob, that's counter-democratic and counter to our interests as people who are benefiting from these organizations and the good work that they ultimately do produce. Not all, not always efficiently, not always to the degree we want, but there is nevertheless a net benefit that these organizations have provided that should not be, as they say in one famous saying, should not be the baby getting thrown out with the bathwater as we try to fix and change the problems within these organizations. Thank you.
So now finally, I know she has been waiting for a long time. Ambika, please, your statement. But it's really thrilling what's going on here. And just having a remark, we will start the audience questions with already 3 that we have for Valeriu. So he will have his next statement already during the audience questions. But now please, Ambika, I know it was a lot you have to react.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that there was a time period where, you know, we used to watch a lot of TV, and then all of a sudden the internet came. And in the 90s, it really revolutionized how people were responding to media, and we replaced TV in most households. Don't even have a TV set anymore. Most people watch stuff on their mobile phones. Most people do things via Netflix. And I think we're sort of at that exact same time right now with international development and reorganization. I think we have moved very much since COVID and since a lot of what's happened with climate change, and just having to realize that we can't be separated into countries, that we can't just be here's headquarters and here's everything else. A lot of people have moved away from the headquarters model. People have moved away from our hierarchical model. I've seen a lot more people working in collaborative teams. I see many more people, even funders, like Hewlett's recent strategy was actually just supporting locally led on the ground initiatives. and not big Western funders. So I think that like a lot of change is already happening. And that we're sort of like at this point where we're not going to go back to the old international development model. And the people who are going to be in that model are probably not going to get the next set of funds. If we look at where Gates is putting funding and like where, you know, the big funders right now are actually investing work, it's in innovation, it's in locally led development, it's in people that are distributed and decentralized. And I believe that we are inherently, because of what happened with COVID and the remote workforce and like the way that the world has now changed from what it was two years ago, we're in a completely different situation. And I don't think we're going to go back to that one.
Thanks, Ambika. Just one sorry to those in the chat. It's so many messages coming in. So I really need to take them one in a row. And I already announced that we have one question that is going explicitly to Valerio, but the second one also to the whole panel. I just read it out for everybody, maybe for those who are not in the chat, by Alex. First of all, congrats, Valerio, for your work, despite the clear disappointment in many of existing structures and their leaders. Many choose to give up after a while when facing factors as these. My questions and problems. Most AI NGOs work with boards. How to ensure there is a good transition period between boards. Second, how to manage local requirements in communication context of IGOs. Third, this is a very long one, but it's going to everybody. Grassroots experience in NGOs face financing problems. Financing is horrendous when dealing with existing mechanisms and the bureaucracy. Very true point that. And actually, we did not talk about money really yet. So guess, good to bring it up now, the money topic. Thanks, Alex. Valerio, what do you respond to that? And by the way, this goes out to the whole panel. Maybe you also want to answer to that after Valerio. Your microphone, Valerio, microphone.
I don't believe the INGOs are accountable to boards. They are accountable to their governments. I mean, the politicians there do not think about what their board is going to say. They think about their political career. So yeah, most of I mean, in my experience, boards, I was in the board of, in a board at the UN level, and we were a joke. I mean, all the recommendations we're making to the High Commissioner on Human Rights, none of them were taken in account. So it was just a, just a form without any meaning. So yeah, I don't know. I think we need. I mean, I would like to believe that things will go nice and that the COVID changed the world and so on, but as one that has experience in government, I really don't see why politicians will give up the way, their very comfortable life and do it the way you say they will do. I think all the incentives are towards keeping the same format. I mean, why would I change the son of the prince to be the High Commissioner on Human Rights when he has no experience whatsoever with human rights, but we give enough money to the UN to be able to appoint whoever we want? Why to give up on this? Why not to have, a joke of a Human Rights Council where Syria and all other countries, I mean, similar countries play an important role there? Why not to dominate the, all kind of intergovernmental organization which sound great and we can use them for their purpose? And why to give this money for, some crazy guys that do work at the level of grassroots who will prove that we were wasting so much money up to now? It's against, I don't see the logic of it. I would like that to happen, but I don't see the logic of it.
Ambika and Katarzyna, you don't need to raise the hand. You're part of the panel in this case, and the audience wants to hear your answers too. And before EJ's next comment, we have audience question for you too. But now it was Ambika first and then Katarzyna.
Sorry, that was just the same hand from last time. I'll leave it to the audience questions.
Okay, then Katarzyna already reacts to this audience question.
I wanted to say two things. One is that indeed, when we look at one IGO event's price tag vis-a-vis what could be done with this money if it was channeled to the communities out there, and the impact it could have, multiplied impact vis-a-vis the often questionable value of these conferences and events long term, I think there is a space for improvement. But I will also say this to you, Valerio, and to the as to why they would change. I think they will have to change because there, for a couple of reasons. The world is in turmoil, and this turmoil is not going away. And I think the international intergovernmental multilateral sector has to realize that it is undergoing a survival question, or living through a survival question. It's a question of legitimacy. It's a question of relevance. It's a question of effectiveness. It's a question of ability to respond to pertinent issues that they are not going to go away. And COVID has shown us that these things are real, these things are global, these things affect everybody. And so the question is, are they able to respond? And I think the next big thing that is just around the corner, and the young generation is already painfully aware of how big it is the climate emergency. And I also wanted to say that to some of the previous comments, that, and that again is a little bit of dreaming on this issue of whether international organizations can acknowledge and embrace failure. There's this very nice example. There is an organization called Engineers Without Borders, and its Canada chapter, of course, produces the annual report as everybody else does, but they also produce an annual failure report where they actually openly and honestly discuss what didn't work. And I would like to see my former organization and other IGOs to be able to do something similar, because I think this would be actually quite good for them, quite good for their stakeholders, and quite good for increasing possibilities for impact.
Failure report, thrilling idea. So OIC, UN people out there, if you have a taste for something new, a failure report would be a quite good thing. And now we also have a directly posed question to EJ regarding the topic of recruiting. And we already talked about recruiting today. What we talked already today was that people who would be able to change don't enter the jobs. But the question is regarding a different focus. From Saravanan, she's asking to Mr. Harold, you mentioned about frequent rotation of people within the organization. Through my experience, I have seen there was a lack of continuity and consistency in implementation of goals due to the rotation of personnel. What would be correct mechanisms to overcome that? And I think the question is thrilling because we also heard the very opposite already today. So EJ, what is your thoughts about it?
Oh, thank you. That is an apt question. I did experience this within the NATO environment, in the sense that an awful lot of our positions became encumbered by people with permanent contracts as a result of an institutional decision taken many years before I got there. And because over time people continued to stay and may have gotten promoted through the system, they nevertheless got to a point where they couldn't progress any further, and then everything backed up behind them and was blocked. So I think there is within international organizations, there is a need for some continuity. There should be a balance between people who stay longer term, and you can pick what that definition is. Is it 6 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? And people who rotate through the organization, whether they rotate on defined duration contracts for a period of time, as I did. I was on 3 years, renewable one time for 3 years for a total of 6 years. And then I had to move. I could have moved to another position within the organization, but would have had to compete to get that position rather than simply get promoted or moved into it, which I think is absolutely fair and right. But should I have stayed longer, or should somebody else have left sooner? These are questions of balance within an organization. You need a certain degree of continuity, which implies that there should be people who are there longer term to maintain the notion of structure without it becoming, as I described earlier, that plaque building up in the arteries that constrains initiative or constrains new ideas. And the infusion of new people at all levels of the organization, from entry level all the way up to the most senior people, so that you get the opportunity to bring in new ideas and to change the character of decision-making within the organization to reflect modern and changing realities.
Thanks a lot, EJ, for that statement. I hope for the audience that this question was answered well. And I also see that Larry will go next. But before Larry goes next, I want to put something up that I would like to hear, especially your opinion, Larry, about it. A very good approach, which is also leading us to the next round of questions, which actually leads to the point of what must we change, actually? So we talked about what's wrong. We talked about the money issue. We talked about the recruiting issue. So these are all kinds of issues. But what's the solution to these issues? What is our vision to solve these challenges? And we have a brave discussion person here, and I want to put that to you, Larry, and everybody from the panel can again answer to audience questions. Irina is saying, things will change only, one, when the leaders within the IGOs will be more accountable in front of their teams. Second, when there will be less differences in salaries or benefits between team members in precarious contracts, for example, at local level, via amazing benefits for international professionals. And third, when organizations will stop enriching a few that work as leaders in the field or HQs instead of using the funds for projects. Larry, you have a lot of experience on IGO level, so maybe you go first to that, and I'm sure you have a lot of remarks to what was said already. Sorry for overwhelming information, but everything that is said here today is just thrilling. Sorry about that.
So I'm going to cede ground to the panelists on the second part of the question, because the only reason I put my hand up was, again, EJ triggered the thought. Sorry, EJ, I'm not picking on you, right, actually. But this is the thing, right? We have organizations that have fixed term contracts. So people are, in a sense, compelled to move on. But what happens is that, do they replace, or that make that replacement in a different profile, for instance, right? So what tends to happen with recruitment is that they're looking for somebody who match the skill set you may have had and your background. So whilst there's an inbuilt mechanism that kind of sense, in a sense, initiates or proposes change, it's static. It's, again, performative, right? Because they don't take that opportunity to look outside the box. In my work with the Swedish Ombudsman's office, we were looking at how certain groups in Swedish society were excluded in the job market. And a lot of these people were qualified, in some instances, super qualified, but their qualifications were never considered to be on a par with their Swedish Swedish interlocutor or contemporary. So they're starting at a deficit. So when I know that I went to 2 stellar universities and another one in the US, but if I didn't have those backgrounds, I don't think that I would have had the opportunities that I had. And earlier today, we were talking about the challenges for people of African descent operating at a particular level of engagement. And that the fact is that when you come from a particular place, the global south and the global north, your qualifications are not considered to be commensurate or equal. So when you apply for these jobs, you're not treated, or you literally have virtually no chance. And so the capacity for the change to take place is lost, because again, they will look for a Eurocentric or somebody with a Eurocentric background. I've been Eurocentricized, even because my life has been brought up in Europe. I've spent mainly in Europe and these European academic institutions and experiences. But this is the challenge, right? How to valorize those alternative realities. We talk about barriers to recruitment. Well, the formal processes that say that you need to have an MA from a particular background, or at least that in for some mediocre positions, is actually a barrier to that process, or to that position. So it's again something that we look at in terms of how do we get beyond that, because it's institutionalized and it's internalized and embodied by the people who do recruitment. They just apply those filters with some kind of like basic or simplified algorithm, and it just filters out difference and looks for much of a muchness. And so this is the challenge and the problematic that I think that we need to pay attention to, because just simply having the capacity to do so doesn't necessarily mean that it will end up in that way. Because again, a lot of people have tried, and and I'm not talking about people with racially or nationally different in terms of coming from a Black or Roma background, but even within the gender perspective and dynamic, that women are so allegedly do not meet a particular profile because it's been typically a man's job, right? These narratives and discourses still exist today. So we need to make sure that we find a way of actually making sure that the interest that we set these mechanisms up for is actually achieved and not perverted as we currently see. So, so again, I think you are the exception to the rule. I'm completely with Valerio in this, in terms of some of the processes need to be fundamentally challenged. And we need to ask an existential question, which is how we started this whole discussion, is that, well, if IGOs are not necessarily fit for purpose, then why do we have them? What are they here for? Because if they're not having these failure reports and they're just kind of like giving, everything's a success, like the machines in a box in a hospital, because I know this is not just it's something that happens with one IGO, it happens with all. So this is the challenge here, and this is why we need a critical assessment. And when I say critical, a root branch assessment of how these things operate and how we devise strategies and solutions to overcome them. Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
thanks, Larry.
Yeah, EJ, just directly react. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. You're correct, and I don't want to create the impression that I got it all right or that I have the answers. In fact, I had an experience where I think we were doing the right things, but I was within a structure that paid lip service to the way to do things from an HR perspective and how we were going to recruit people. But the individual positions were controlled by the direct line manager, and they made the choices that led to the screening of individuals, the selection of a long list and a short list. And they had a great deal of influence in the diversity of the pool from which they chose successors. So to your point about, well, somebody leaves and they're replaced by somebody who looks exactly like the person before them, there is some validity to that. One of the things that does occur is no two people are the same. And so even if, me as a white male with military background left my job and was replaced by a white male with military background, he and I had different experiences, and he still brought different ways of working and different ideas with him to take the work forward, and did not carry on the things that I had done, or did not do things that, and I don't mean that pejoratively, he had a different focus. because things had changed. There were new imperatives from the nations. There were things to be pursued and followed up on. And so while the staff remained static underneath him, relatively speaking, they were now supporting a different boss. So there is change, there is evolution. That's the glacial pace of change, not very fast, incremental, and not always very productive or satisfying, as opposed to the change that you're talking about, which should be ensconced in the rules that we're supposed to recruit by, the open-minded organization of things and procedures. And we're imperfect organizations because we're led by people. And unless we apply the right pressure, and again, that's where I think the genius of what you're doing with the Responsible Leadership Academy comes in. You're not going to change it overnight, but you're going to set standards that you expect. You're going to send messages to international organizations, to governments, and change happens because of people. Change happens because you start the discussion and you plant the seeds and you push that agenda for change, and eventually we can get there. Will it happen in my lifetime? Probably not as satisfactorily as you all aspire to in the RLA, but we've got to start somewhere. So, thanks for the comments.
Thank you, EJ. Coming back at this
Sorry,
point, I know.
are you, EJ?
Yeah, Valerie.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Are you sure that
was
that's
supposed-
true? Because I'm not sure. I mean, we replaced a Trudeau with another Trudeau. We accepted very easily that, Trump could put his son-in-law and daughter in very high-level position without no problems. Where was the white man revolt against it? I didn't see any revolt against it. I mean, I saw lots of lip service, lots of excuses. World Bank didn't have anything to say when the name of Mrs. Trump was say, or the UN didn't say anything. They were invited everywhere. Absolutely no problem. They will receive those jokes because they weren't specialists in anything. They were received with all the pomp and all the courtesy that anybody, all the experts and so on will receive. So I think we need to, I do understand this American culture where you need to be polite, because if you're not polite, you don't promote. But I think it has a huge limitation and it becomes toxic at this moment. So if we continue to say, hey, look, don't worry, it's not in my lifetime, maybe after 200 years, it's going to be fine, I don't think it's helpful at all. And, better, in my opinion, courage is not, to be nice about things. Courage is to say things as they are and to take the responsibility of pissing off people because they need to get pissed off. It's not acceptable what happens at this moment. It's not acceptable that we waste so much money. No, the international organization and intergovernmental organization are very, very far from being efficient. And we need to say all this. We need to talk about all this. We need to talk also about assessments. The yearly assessments are ridiculous. In Council of Europe, all the people in Council of Europe wanted to have excellent. So nobody was very good or good. Everybody there was excellent. That's not an assessment. An assessment should be from at least 5% of people should be put on not satisfactory. A good part of people should be on satisfactory. The majority of people should be on good, and very, very few should be exceptional, because that's the meaning of exceptional. The meaning of exceptional is not everybody. So when we're going to have the courage, and not us, I mean, when you guys who are still in position in all these organizations will have the courage to say that, then the things will change. Until then, you know, as you said, I will wait this next life and next, and so on.
And
I'm
I
not
want to
picking on you.
react to this if I can.
Sorry, Katarzyna. Sorry, Katarzyna. Yes, you can, but you will stay longer with us. And we only have 12 minutes to go because the time flies if we have thrilling contribution as this. So just two sentences before we go into the conclusion round where everybody can say what's most importantly here. And I even want to put more chili on what Valerio said, as I feel this is also my job as a moderator. So let's put up the really hard question. If we take serious what Valerio is telling us with all his experience, there is one question. Larry also put it up. If we talk about survival, it means and EJ was talking about evolution. So that might mean that international organizations in the present times as they are not fit for the future. Maybe we don't have another 50 years to reinvent them, change them, reform them, because structure actually is what we have in our minds. That actually is the structure we are fighting against. So the question is, maybe people like Valerio set up the new international organizations of the future. Maybe they don't have the money, maybe they don't have national mandates, but maybe they have one unique selling proposition, which would be the credibility and trust of the people on that globe. Think this is a very good intro to the last question, to the conclusion round of the day for everybody. So how do international organizations and leadership in the future look like if we believe in everything that was said today? And maybe Ambika and Valerio, I guess you have to leave very, very punctually. I guess it was 6 p.m. Maybe those start who really need to leave at 6 p.m. and don't have 1 minute longer.
Then I will be very brief, and I think it's EJ who needs to leave at 6 sharp, but I will be very brief and I will say this. To both your question, Gilda, and to what Valerio said, yes, I do think we need some sort of a revolution rather than evolution. And yes, I do think this will change. It's similar to the processes that we observe with democracy around the world that is crumbling, but it's crumbling because also the traditional notion of what representative democracy looks like has eroded beyond the point of repair, perhaps. And so if I wanted to see an international leadership in international organization that is actually meaningful, I would say a space for reflection, but like safe, honest, real space for reflection, which is exactly why we have set up these discussions in the Responsive Leadership Academy. But I would also say, there's something now discussed very widely in the democracy movement, which is called citizens panels, and that is a model that's tried in different places around the world, and it actually seems to be working. And it's this citizens engagement with IGOs that I believe could be something. And so instead of closing up to only the usual suspects and selected few, especially from the NGO world, that have access to and can actually discuss something with IGOs, to open up and create these citizens panels that would be almost like a guiding force for IGOs, telling them, advising them what to do, how to do it, and where it doesn't work. That's something that I think would be a nice thing to do. And by the way, there is a nice research by the Oxford University from a couple of years ago about leadership in international organizations that has been read by few and acted by even fewer, and could be a very good starting point for a reflection process.
EJ, your conclusion statement.
Well, thanks. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation today. And I think Valerio and I come at this from different points of view, but I share his observations and his passion if I express it differently. To Katarzyna's point about the demise of democracy, I'm perhaps naive or a bit idealistic, but I see, particularly in my own country, the tremors that have shaken democracy and democratic practice here in the United States. Democracy has withstood those tremors, and we're still fighting through the aftershocks with societal discussion and political wrangling, both in terms of electoral politics, as we're in an election season here in the United States, but also within the Congress and the aftermath of the January 6th events that you all are so familiar with. I think for the future, as we talk about how we look at international organizations and how we inspire or promote or develop leadership for the future, there are a couple of things that are fundamental to achieving any level of success. One is a common education level. And by that, it's everything from understanding civics and national politics, but also how the international organizations function. You know, they have charters, every single one of them, but how many of us have read the charter for our international organization, understand the wisdom of the people who conceived of those organizations in the first instance, and then look at critically how the organization has or has not lived up to that charter and what's necessary to put it back on the rails, if you will, to see it achieve its original objective. And if the answer to that is it's not possible or it's no longer desirable, then do we have the courage and the capacity to close that international organization and put those resources to other things? And the final piece that enables all of that is respectful dialogue. It's the underpinning part of democracy. It is the thing that we have characterized as the value of bringing people together in international organizations, whether it's the UN, the OSCE, NATO, the EU. Dialogue and the ability to listen to people of different opinions and to accept their point of view, even if you don't like it, and look for common ground is a fundamental aspect of what we should be promoting in international organizations. So to my earlier comment about, will it happen in my lifetime? I hope so. My comment was meant to be realistic, that it may not happen in my lifetime, but I hope that I'm part of initiating that change, initiating that, that effort. And by being part of this discussion today with the Responsible Leadership Academy, I think I've added my small piece to the puzzle and hope that you all have enjoyed listening to my comments and thoughts. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, EJ. Just in case you miss last comments, only 3 minutes to go officially in the discussion, but for sure we will not break whatever Valerio and Ambika still have to say, but we already say officially goodbye to EJ. Thanks for joining us because he has to leave sharply at 6 p.m. Thanks a lot. Valerio and Ambika, a lot you have to comment on. Very, very difficult to make a conclusion for today, but still, if you may, give us the honor to have your conclusion statements. Whoever wants to start, it's fine. Valerio and Ambika.
I'll let Ambika.
Sure. So I think that in terms of the future of international development work, I think there's going to be a few things that happen. One is that we move into a much more collaborative atmosphere where international work is not, it's not like the $100 million grants over 7-year terms with like log frames and indicators, but like much more agile, much quicker, and joining with CSOs, like things that are happening and like really responding to real-time stuff, like what happened so quickly on the ground with COVID and where we learned. So I think we're really going to be moving into a very, very decentralized international organizational world. I think there's going to be like a very big split between like, are you an NGO or are you a think tank or are you a CSO or, and like the identities of what all these things are is going to be much more fluid. I mean, it has to be because there's now too many people competing in the space. Now you have like startups and like tech companies and design companies, and you have all these other people and like social media companies and people doing Twitter accounts who like want to change like, behavior change through Instagram. So when you have all of that saturating, you have partnerships, and then other people just can't compete on the same levels. So I think that we're going to be moving very much into a decentralized space, which will be great. I also think we're going to be moving into a much more equitable space. I think that's going to take a lot longer. I think the decentralization is already happening today. Moving towards equity is a really complicated concept because a lot of people who talk about equity, there's just a lot of like, and I always make this statement that if you're talking about how diverse your organization is, it's probably not that diverse, because if it was diverse, you wouldn't have to talk about it because you would just see that it was diverse. But the fact that you're spending all this time talking about it means that you're probably like really, really need to explain what's wrong. And so I think we're really far from understanding how much equity is a proactive like effort, and that it's not going to just like happen because you like hire someone of color in a position. And then it's like much more long-changing change, and it's like really changing how you think about things and how you center it, and that efforts really need to be placed. I think that is a much more glacial speed and much slower process. But the decentralization, I think that's happening now. I mean, I think I already can see, even in my last 5 to 7 years of working, like how many people are now working with journalists on the ground, and how many more people are working with like local communities and headquarters, and everyone's sort of trying to get in the same sphere. I do think COVID changed a lot of that in the last couple of years, because now everything's been virtual and remote. I can see that being inclusive in that way has also really helped. I'm not saying that everyone is doing it, but the ones who are doing it and the ones who are doing it right are getting noticed. And those people who are getting noticed by bigger funders, I think will inspire other people to start moving towards the same. Yeah, I even think things like fail fast and failure reports and stuff, like you would never have heard about that like 10 years ago. And now it's like cool. Now it's cool to fail. It's cool to iterate. Why did that happen? I do think a lot of that's to do with the tech industry. Once you started having startups, and once you started having this idea of entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship being and private enterprise being a completely effectual way to create change and to create development change, and that they are part of the system, I think you were like, okay, yeah, if they can fail, we can fail. I don't think all funders are on board, but I think we're moving very quickly to a decentralized, sort of agile, like startup-y world. I'm much more concerned about like the equity changes, which I've heard a lot of people talk about, but I actually haven't seen any boards really be changed or dismantled. And I'd like to see a lot of that happen.
Thanks, Ambika. I've seen out there on Facebook also, you have a lot of fans out there really thinking and discussing also your inputs today. Thank you that you have been our guest today, and hopefully we see each other again also in the frame of the Responsible Leadership Academy. But actually, there's still one more conclusion statement missing, the one by Valerio, before he's going to start, because I'm sure he will burn down the house again, which is totally great. I would like to state that for everybody who is still inside the discussion, recruiting was a big topic today. For everybody who is interested in that topic, especially, I wanted to say that on the 18th of January, our next discussion will focus actually the topic of recruiting in international organizations and in the leadership. So for everybody who is here today, very interested in the topic of recruiting of the future, 18th of January. Best ways to follow on Facebook, on LinkedIn, wherever. We are everywhere. And follow so you don't miss our next discussion on recruiting. Now I'm really looking forward to the conclusion of Valerio from this discussion today.
I very much enjoyed the discussion. I enjoy EJ a lot. But okay, I'm happy you brought this with the recruitment. I will tell a small story. So while I was at the Council of Europe, the Deputy Secretary General, asked me to employ somebody from Italy. She was from Italy, and somebody with no experience whatsoever. And of course, I refused it because I couldn't give her anyway. So, and that was to the shock of everybody. How can I refuse the Deputy General? And then she insisted also within my team for somebody from my team to employ that person. So to me, if there would be, again, nepotism and corruption are huge within international intergovernmental organization because there is huge amounts of money paid for these positions. So the way to change this is practically to change the culture. I think we have an obsession with leadership. I am fed up with good-looking actors like Trudeau reading really nice prepared speeches by people we don't see ever. I don't understand the need for a white male to go everywhere and read papers prepared by some guys who are really experts at that. I don't understand the need to glorify the big leader. There is no big leader. I mean, we should glorify teams. The better the teams, the better the organization. So I would like to see, who's the best in the team to go and present. Who's the best? But leadership should be just encouraging other people to be better. A manager should not be a leader, should be a manager, and his role or her role is to make other people better and to make himself useless. If you're good, you don't need to keep the same job for 10 years. If you keep the same job, I mean, if you stay glued to your chair, means you're not good. If you're not able to find a job after you've been the manager of an organization with 10,000 people, then it means you're a bad leader and bad manager. So yeah, I think we culturally look at the things wrong, and we continue to promote. So the kings, the culture of kings and queens is the most spread at the level of international intergovernmental organization. It is sickening to see the lip service and the pampering and the protocol around these people. And I will tell you the last story. So we managed to do something great. We managed to convince UEFA to do a really cool campaign, to do a campaign against violence against women. But why it didn't happen? Because a guy from an organization, and here I talk about OSCE, didn't want to meet because it wasn't at the same level with the other guy at another organization. And because that was, I mean, it didn't matter that it was a great campaign. It didn't matter that it would change. It was just about ego and positioning. That was it. So that's what we need to change. We need to show this, and we need to be a lot more vocal about how idiotic and moronic our leaders can be.
Hashtag ego death, hashtag of the day at Responsible Leadership Academy, hashtag ego death. Wonderful hashtag, I guess. Also very important for our next discussion on the 18th of January about recruiting, where there is a lot of interest. And actually, my job as a moderator at this point is done, except for saying thank you to everybody and giving the last word to those responsible for the responsible, right? Leadership Academy, Katarzyna and Larry, you have the last word of the day. From my side, was honor and also fun to moderate this really brilliant panel today.
I will just say I am immensely humbled by the interest and participation. I used to say that people tend to gravitate towards certain values and principles. Not only people who share these values, but also people who really believe in change and want to be a part of the change. And I see this happening around the Responsible Leadership Academy, and every day it happens. It makes me really grateful and really humble. And on this discussion, we plan for a whole year of discussions, because the idea is to open a platform where there is none, and to remove the kind of black box of organizational leadership, but make it an open forum when it comes to IGOs. So I really am very grateful to all of you, to all those who watched us on Facebook, and to all those who follow us on LinkedIn. And I do hope we will be in touch. I know we will, and please reach out, and we will be happy to see how we can engage. The only thing I'm sorry about is that we have run out of time to answer all your questions.
Yeah, Katarzyna, I'm looking at the questions in chat and also trying to keep up with what's happening on the Facebook page. For me, I would just like to say thank you to everybody, to the panelists. We've been spending, people who know us, our close friends, we've been spending at least 2 years talking about what's the next step, what's the next move. The pandemic kicked in with the COVID-19 crisis and altered some of that vision, but actually generated different opportunities such as this. So I'd just like to say thank you to that. And also to Valerio and his last point about that particular experience that you had with this campaign. It is so symptomatic. I mean, and I'm glad you named names, and hopefully anyone who's from the OSCE who heard the story would just take this as a pause for thought, an opportunity to think about some of the questions that we've raised and the discussion points. We've been talking about whether IGOs are fit for purpose because of this and other issues. And I do think it's something to bear in mind as we go forward. I just would like to wish everyone a happy evening, happy day, wherever you are in the world joining us. And again, show the gratitude that you took the time out in your schedules to participate and to listen to us. And also to thank Gilda for a wonderful dynamic moderation. It's been great working with you, and I just look forward to the next iteration. So please all stay well, and we look forward to hearing from you and continue the discussion as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks to the audience. Follow Responsible Leadership Academy on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and join us for the recruiting discussion, the second one on 18th of January. Meanwhile, send us your questions, your input. This is no leaders leader forum. This is actually democratic input. So send us your question, comments, and critics we love the most. Thanks for being here. We quit this now. For now, you can still comment on Facebook. And if you missed it, send it to your friends who missed it. Make them watch it. You can rewatch it on Facebook. We have a video too. Have a great evening. And never forget, leadership means serving people. Good evening or good morning, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you.